Assalamu alaikum. So we're continuing our lectures on the endocrinology, the endocrine system. So till now we've studied about the introduction of the endocrine system. Then we've studied the hypothalamus, the pituitary, the thyroid, parathyroid gland, their hormones, etc. Now we'll start adrenal gland. After adrenal, we'll study the pancreas and the disease which is very common in pancreas, that is diabetes mellitus. We'll study that too. So for now, our today's topic would be adrenal gland. So adrenal glands are also known as suprarenal glands. Why are they known as suprarenal? You'll just know in a minute. There are a pair of adrenal glands, two adrenal glands, both of which are located on the superior pole of the kidneys. So the right and the left adrenal are located on the superior pole of the kidneys, just above the kidneys. That is why they are also known as suprarenal glands. So they are also known as suprarenal glands. They consist of two parts. They are composed of two parts, that is the adrenal cortex and the adrenal medulla. Okay, so the inner part is known as the adrenal medulla, whereas the outer part is known as the adrenal cortex. Now let's talk about the histology of the adrenal gland. Each gland is composed of two distinct parts, the inner medulla and the outer adrenal cortex. Adrenal cortex is then further subdivided into three zones: zona glomerulosa, zona fasciculata, and zona reticulosa. You can remember it by the mnemonic GFR. GFR is the glomerular filtration rate that we've studied in kidney. We'll study this in renal physiology in the next semester too. So GFR stands for glomerular filtration rate, and GFR also stands for glomerulosa, fasciculata, and reticulosa. So this is a picture. This is the outer capsule that covers this is the outer capsule that covers the adrenal gland. After the capsule comes the adrenal cortex, out of which the first zone, the first layer of cells compose zona glomerulosa. Then comes the zona fasciculata, and in the end the zona reticulosa, and then there is the adrenal medulla, that is the innermost part. Okay, so the first zona glomerulosa is composed of a thin layer of cells that lies just underneath the capsule, as we can see in this picture in the microscopic section. And this layer, zona glomerulosa, secretes mineralocorticoids. Mineralocorticoids, as denoted by their name, they absorb minerals from the urine, or help in absorption of minerals from the urine. So the major mineralocorticoid that is secreted via zona glomerulosa is the aldosterone. Then comes the zona fasciculata, that is the inner layer. Zona fasciculata is the widest of all the three zones. It is the middle and the widest layer of the cortex, and it secretes glucocorticoids, that is the it secretes the glucocorticoids And then there is the zona reticulosa, which is the innermost zone, which secretes adrenal androgens. Alright, so zona reticulosa is also known as zona reticularis. This zone is the deepest layer of the cortex, and it secretes adrenal androgens and small amounts of estrogen and some glucocorticoids. So glucocorticoids and androgens are released by both zona fasciculata and reticulosa, but major contributor to the glucocorticoids is the zona fasciculata, whereas major production of the adrenal androgens takes place in the zona reticularis. Main glucocorticoid is the cortisol. That would help in regulation of the body. It helps many enzymes do their functions, and androgens are kind of sex hormones. Then comes the innermost layer, that is the adrenal medulla. Adrenal medulla contains chromaffin cells. This adrenal medulla is functionally related to the sympathetic nervous system, and it would go on to secrete catecholamines. The main catecholamines are the epinephrine, norepinephrine, and the dopamine. The main secretion of this adrenal medulla is the epinephrine. These medullary hormones are derivatives of tyrosine amino acids. Now, let's take a look at the differences between cortex and the medulla. So, structurally, adrenal cortex is comprised of 3 zones, whereas adrenal medulla does not have any divisions. It is just a bunch of harmonized chromaffin cells. Functionally, adrenal cortex secretes corticosteroids, whereas adrenal medulla secrete catecholamines. And development of adrenal cortex takes place from mesoderm in the fetus, whereas adrenal medulla is derived from neuroectoderm or the neural crest cells. That is why it is more closely related to the nervous system as compared to the endocrine system. So all the glands of the body, they are derived from the mesoderm, whereas the central nervous system, etc., is derived from the neuroectoderm. If we look at the blood supply of the adrenal gland, each gland is supplied by the following arteries. The superior suprarenal artery, which is a branch of inferior phrenic artery. The middle suprarenal artery, which is a branch of abdominal aorta, and the inferior suprarenal artery, which is a branch of renal artery. So we can see here, this is the suprarenal gland. Here, this is the suprarenal gland, which is supplied by the superior suprarenal artery, the middle suprarenal artery, and the inferior suprarenal artery. And the the venous drainage is the same. The smaller veins would combine together to form a single suprarenal vein on both sides. Right suprarenal vein drains into inferior vena cava, whereas left suprarenal vein drains into the left renal vein. So now let's take a look at the hormones secreted by the adrenal gland. First we'll study the hormones which are secreted by the adrenal cortex and then the adrenal medulla. So there are three types of adrenocortical hormones that are secreted. The mineralocorticoids, which are secreted by the outermost zona glomerulosa, then the glucocorticoids secreted by the zona fasciculata, and small amount of sex hormones, especially androgenic hormones, which are secreted by the zona reticularis. The hormones of the adrenal cortex are derivatives of the cholesterol and are steroid in nature. So remember this, the adrenocortical hormones are steroids in nature, whereas the adrenal medulla's hormones are derived of tyrosine amino acids. So remember this. Now let's discuss mineralocorticoids, or the secretions of zona glomerulosa. The mineralocorticoids have gained this name because they especially affect the electrolytes or the minerals of the extracellular fluids, namely sodium and potassium. So these mineralocorticoids would act on absorption or excretion of minerals from the extracellular fluid. Mainly aldosterone is responsible for the increased absorption of sodium and excretion of potassium. So aldosterone, which is released from here, is a very potent hormone that accounts for about 90% of all the mineralocorticoid activity. So 90% of the activity carried out by mineralocorticoids is by aldosterone. This is the main hormone. Then there is deoxycorticosterone, which is 1/30th times as potent as aldosterone, but very small quantities are secreted. And then there is corticosterone, which only has slight mineralocorticoid activity. A thing to note out here is there is a hormone that is fluorocortisol. This is a synthetic form of mineralocorticoid. It is not synthesized within the body. It is given via IV injections from outside as a drug, and it is slightly more potent than aldosterone. So in patients with hypoaldosteronism, as we'll study in the next slides or in the next lecture, in the patients in which aldosterone cannot be produced in the body due to destruction of adrenal gland or due to any other causes, you give this fluorocortisol. The functions of the mineralocorticoids are, when we discuss about the functions of mineralocorticoids, we are mainly discussing the functions of aldosterone. So we are talking about aldosterone in general here, but the other mineralocorticoids would also perform the same functions. The first and foremost, the most important function is the increase in reabsorption of sodium from the renal tubules. So this aldosterone is released from the suprarenal gland, travels to the renal tubule, and it would increase the reabsorption of sodium from there. Now remember one thing, water follows sodium. So wherever sodium goes, water would go with it. So if the sodium is being reabsorbed, water is being reabsorbed from the tubule. Remember this. If sodium is being excreted, then water is being excreted from the renal tubule. So aldosterone would reabsorb sodium, which would in turn reabsorb water, and it would increase the blood pressure. Remember this. So there would be increased reabsorption of sodium and increased excretion of potassium from the renal tubules. So it increases the sodium in the blood and decreases the potassium levels in the blood. Excess aldosterone or hyperaldosteronism would cause hypokalemia and muscle weakness. Remember this. So if there is excessive aldosterone being produced in the body, it would result in excess potassium being excreted out from the kidneys, from the body, which would end in a situation that is known as hypokalemia, and it would cause muscle weakness. Whereas too little aldosterone would cause hyperkalemia, that is increased potassium concentration in the blood, and cardiac toxicity. It would produce changes on the ECG due to hyperkalemia. Hyperkalemic changes can be seen in the ECG, and the heart's rhythm may be disturbed. It could be disturbed. Contractility is obviously disturbed. It would increase extracellular fluid volume. So it increases extracellular fluid volume and would in turn increase the arterial pressure. So it would have an increasing effect on the blood pressure. It would increase extracellular fluid due to reabsorption of sodium. What would follow it? Increased extracellular fluid, increased blood pressure, arterial pressure. Aldosterone also increases tubular hydrogen ion secretion. So hydrogen ion is secreted more and it makes the blood alkalotic. The sodium conserving action of aldosterone is also seen in salivary ducts, sweat glands and distal colon. So apart from acting on the renal tubule, it would also act on the salivary ducts where the saliva is produced in the mouth, the sweat glands all over the body, and the distal colon, the last part of the colon, and would help in reabsorption of sodium from there too. So the culmination of its action is the increased sodium in the body. So mineralocorticoids are also known as life-saving hormones. Why? Because mineralocorticoid deficiency would cause severe renal sodium chloride wasting and hyperkalemia. So if there are no more mineralocorticoids produced in the body, or are produced in very less amount, it would cause increased potassium in the blood and decreased sodium and chlorine in the body, sodium chloride in the body. So decreased aldosterone would decrease sodium chloride reabsorption from the kidney, which would result in loss of salt and water and decreased extracellular fluid volume. Moreover, there would be decreased loss of potassium by the kidney and increased accumulation of potassium in the blood, which would cause cardiac toxicity. So both of these conditions, decreased extracellular fluid volume, decreased blood pressure, hypertension and cardiac toxicity, would result in shock, which can then lead to death. So it is very essential for the continuation of life, for the survival of a human being. Now let's look at the mechanism of action of aldosterone. How does the aldosterone act on the renal tubules and on the body? So aldosterone promotes the activity of sodium potassium ATPase dependent pump that moves sodium into the renal extracellular fluid in exchange for potassium. So there are small pathways, you can say, in the cell membranes of different cells, such as in the renal tubules there are small pumps, there are small pathways which require energy to operate. They use ATP, that are packets of energy, also known as adenosine triphosphate. It is the highest form of energy in the body, highest packet of the energy in the body. So It uses ATP to move the sodium inside the cell and move the potassium outside. So it would move sodium inside the body, inside the cell, and then inside the body into the extracellular fluid, and move potassium out of the tubule into the urine. Aldosterone would also increase the number of sodium channels in the luminal membrane. So in the lumen of the kidney, there would be increased sodium channels so that sodium can be reabsorbed more. A consequence of the above action is that the renal tubule lumen would become more negatively charged than the extracellular fluid, and this negative charge would attract potassium and also attract hydrogen ion towards the lumen and causes the loss of potassium and hydrogen ion in the urine. So there is one pump, that is sodium potassium ATPase, where the sodium is being pumped inside, potassium being moved outside via use of energy. Then there are simple sodium channels where sodium is being pumped in and negative charge is acquired, which attracts the potassium, and then potassium is excreted out. So this is what is happening in the renal tubule. This is the luminal membrane. This is where the filtrate is present, that is the urine is present. This is the extracellular fluid, and inside the kidney structure, the basal membrane. So what happens is, first the aldosterone acts on sodium potassium ATPase pump, moves sodium inside and potassium outside towards the urine. Then it would act on sodium channels, which would help in transporting the sodium from the urine into the cell and then into the body, and it would also generate a negative charge out here in the urine, which would pull the potassium ion as well as the hydrogen ion outside into the urine. So it would make urine more acidic and the blood more alkaline. Then there is an enzyme which is breaking down water and carbon dioxide into hydrogen ion and bicarbonate ion. This enzyme is known as carbonic anhydrase. This enzyme, when it breaks down hydrogen ion, breaks down water and carbon dioxide into hydrogen ion and bicarbonate, if this hydrogen ion is accumulating too much in the blood, it would make our body more acidic. So this sodium channel would also help in removing this hydrogen ion outside the blood into the urine. So that would make urine more acidic, but that urine is to be excreted out of the body, so that does not cause a problem. Whereas if this hydrogen gets accumulated in the blood, it would cause acidity, that is known as renal acidosis, and that is a serious condition. Acid-base balance is properly maintained in the body, and any disorder of acid-base balance can prove to be fatal. So bicarbonate ion is moved inside, hydrogen ion is moved outside. Okay, so now let's look at the regulation of aldosterone secretion. How is aldosterone secreted and how is it regulated so that over secretion or under secretion does not take place? So physiologically, aldosterone is largely under the control of renin-angiotensin system. So aldosterone is produced under the renin-angiotensin system that consists of multiple organs being involved in loop, and they would operate it. I'll just explain it in the next slide if it is shown here. Yeah, this is renin-angiotensin system. I'll just explain it in the next slide. Then there is adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH. It also serves a purpose, but it is of minor importance in the control of aldosterone secretion. Aldosterone is controlled by renin-angiotensin system, whereas the other cortisol and the androgens are controlled via ACTH secretion. The sensory output for the aldosterone secretion is via the juxtaglomerular apparatus in the kidney. The main sensory cells are known as the juxtaglomerular cells. Additionally, sensory input is also from the macular denser cells, which are located in the distal tubule of the kidney. They perceive the sodium delivery to the distal nephron and communicate with the juxtaglomerular cells. So if sodium is moving towards the distal nephron, from where it would be then excreted out into the urine, the macular denser cells of the distal tubule communicate this information to the kidney, to the juxtaglomerular cells, from where renin would be released. This renin would act on angiotensin 1, then angiotensin 2 would be released. I'll just explain it in a bit, all of this thing. But the main sensory input would start from the kidneys juxtaglomerular apparatus. So this is the juxtaglomerular apparatus, the proximal tubule, the glomerulus, and these are the juxtaglomerular cells which are present on the afferent arteriole. So they would serve the function of activating the aldosterone release via renin. Then there are these macular denser cells which would detect the sodium concentration in the efferent arteriole, in the distal tubule, sodium going towards the distal tubule, and release the factors which would then act on the suprarenal gland. So this is how the juxtaglomerular apparatus looks. Okay, so mean arterial pressure equals cardiac output into the total peripheral resistance. We'll study it in cardiology, no need to worry about this. If there is decreased pressure in the renal afferent arteriole, means decreased blood pressure, and there is decreased sodium delivery to the macula densa of the distal convoluted tubule, and increased potassium ion concentration, it would activate the baroreceptors of the juxtaglomerular cells, which would release this enzyme which is known as renin. On the other hand, there is an enzyme which is being produced in the liver that is known as angiotensin or alpha 2 globulin, which is an alpha 2 globulin. Angiotensinogen is being produced in the liver. This renin produced from the kidney would act on the angiotensinogen and activate it into angiotensin 1. Angiotensin 1 is not an activated hormone, it is a prohormone. It has not yet reached its activated form. This angiotensin 1 is activated via an enzyme which is known as angiotensin converting enzyme or ACE. This angiotensin converting enzyme would activate this angiotensin 1 into angiotensin 2. This angiotensin 2 would then go on to act on zona glomerulosa of the suprarenal gland. Moreover, this angiotensin 2 would cause vasoconstriction, that is, constriction in the vessels. The lumens would get thinner, lumens would get smaller due to constriction of vessels. The size of the vessel would get smaller, and it would cause increase in blood pressure. When this angiotensin 2 acts on zona glomerulosa, zona glomerulosa would start producing aldosterone. This aldosterone would act on the proximal convoluted tubule in the kidney and increase sodium absorption along with water reabsorption. I've told you earlier, water goes where the sodium goes. So if the sodium is being reabsorbed, water is being reabsorbed more, this would cause increase in plasma volume, which would in turn, when go to heart, would cause increased cardiac output. This increased cardiac output would cause increased blood pressure, and this increased blood pressure would give negative signals, negative feedback to the juxtaglomerular cells to stop producing any more renin, and hence the function of aldosterone would also stop when the blood pressure normalizes. So all of this is known as renin angiotensin aldosterone system. So think about it, this complex mechanism is present in human beings. Let me rephrase it. What happens is, due to decreased blood pressure or decreased cardiac output or increased sodium delivery, increased potassium ion concentration or decreased sodium delivery to the macula densa cells, juxtaglomerular cells which are present in kidney release renin, which acts on angiotensinogen that is being produced in the liver, that is already present in the blood. This angiotensinogen under the effect of renin is being converted into angiotensin 1, which is then activated via an enzyme which is known as angiotensin converting enzyme, which is being produced in the lung. This angiotensin 1 is converting into angiotensin 2 due to ACE, and angiotensin 2 is causing vasoconstriction, increasing blood pressure. Moreover, it is acting on zona glomerulosa to release aldosterone from the adrenal gland. This aldosterone from the adrenal gland would travel to the kidney, act on proximal convoluted tubule, reabsorb sodium from sweat, from distal colon, from the salivary glands, and it would cause increased resorption of water and sodium, which would increase plasma volume, extracellular fluid volume, and which would increase the cardiac output, blood pressure, which would then have negative feedback on the juxtaglomerular cells, and hence this whole system is regulated. So this was the renin angiotensin aldosterone system. So I think this is enough for today. Make sure that you revise it again and again, because it would take many revisions to understand this. I'll answer the 3 questions that I asked earlier tomorrow inshallah in the evening, and your next task is to draw me an renin angiotensin aldosterone system, and it can only be drawn after completely understanding it. So first understand it and then draw it. Okay, so draw this system in a cycle or whichever way you want, and then send the diagrams in the group. Okay, thank you. Allah Hafiz.